The hiss of a soda can crack the silence. Then a splash. Dark liquid poured over her blouse, her skin, the floor beneath her desk. Gasps burst from every corner of the office, but louder still was the laughter. A single voice cut through it, sharp as glass. "We don't work with black women here." She froze, not from fear, from the sting of déjà vu. She had seen this before, in classrooms, in hotel lobbies, in boardrooms dressed as polite smiles. But today, in this polished office high above the city, the insult didn't come with a whisper. It came with Coke dripping from her hair and a dozen colleagues grinning like spectators at a cruel sport. One woman, still holding the empty red can, smirked, her arm lifted like a trophy. Around her, others clapped, one even pulled out a phone. A young intern in the corner looked horrified, phone trembling in his hand, unsure whether to record or hide. The black woman at the center did neither. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she stood still, soda staining her shirt, her eyes steady as if anchored to the floor itself. The office wasn't quiet anymore. It was charged. The air buzzed with cruelty and complicity. You could hear the fizz still bubbling on the desk, like the aftermath of a small explosion. And yet her silence was louder than all of it. "Pathetic," someone whispered behind a keyboard. Another voice, bolder, said, "She should be grateful she's even here." Ugh. She did not move. She did not wipe the liquid dripping down her sleeve. She let them watch. Every second of restraint felt heavier than a shout. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. Her mind raced, but her body remained stone. She remembered being 22, told by a manager that her tone was too direct for customer service. At 28, overlooked for promotion while training the man who got it. At 34, asked if she was lost in a boardroom where she belonged more than anyone. Always the same script, always the same disbelief that she was there at all. But today wasn't just another insult to swallow. Today, she wasn't standing in this room alone. Today, she carried power no one in that office could see yet. Because 5 minutes from now, the door would open. And when it did, the laughter would die. The office looked ordinary. White walls, glass partitions, keyboards clattering in steady rhythm. Nothing about it suggested history was about to split in two. At the center of that storm stood Amara Johnson, 36 years old. She wore a plain black blouse and charcoal slacks, clothes chosen for comfort, not spectacle. No designer labels, no flashy jewelry. Just her, a woman who had worked quietly in this department for 6 months. Her colleagues thought she was new, unconnected, just another face in the sea of cubicles. They whispered she didn't network, didn't laugh at the right jokes, didn't chase approval. To them, she was invisible until the moment she was soaked in Coca-Cola. Now every eye was on her for the wrong reasons. What they didn't know, invisibility was intentional. Amara had built her life on the strength of staying underestimated. Behind that simple blouse was a story no one in this room could have guessed: a marriage to one of the most powerful men in the city, a seat at tables that signed contracts worth billions. But today, she walked in as if she carried none of that. Today, she wanted to see the office for what it really was. The truth showed itself fast. Laughter still rang out in the corners. A woman with a tight grin muttered, "Guess she won't last long here." A man near the copier smirked. Should have known she wasn't a fit. Every word chipped at the atmosphere like a hammer against glass. Amara stood still, water pooling at her feet from the soda dripping down her blouse. She didn't wipe it off. She didn't flinch. That silence, that refusal to react, unsettled more than a scream ever could. The intern in the back shifted nervously. His name was Luis, barely 21, his first month on the job. He had seen office politics before: whispers, backhanded jokes, unfair promotions, but never something this blunt. His hand shook around his phone. Record? Delete? Speak? His conscience battled his fear. Across the room, the manager's office door opened. He stepped out, drawn by the commotion. A tall man in a gray suit, eyes sharp with suspicion, not empathy. He scanned Amara once, Coke still dripping from her sleeve, then glanced at the crowd that had cheered. His lips curled into something between annoyance and disdain. Amara met his eyes but said nothing. She didn't need to. She had lived this look before. At 25, A landlord had told her she looked out of place when signing her first mortgage. At 29, a recruiter had called her too ambitious during an interview. At 33, she had walked into a hotel lobby and been asked if she was lost. Different faces, same gaze, same disbelief. Now, once again, she was being weighed and dismissed, all because they couldn't see who she really was. But that was the point. Because in less than 5 minutes, the man they thought was invisible too, her husband would walk through that same glass door. And when he did, this office would never forget the day they mistook silence for weakness. The laughter didn't fade. It thickened, spreading across the room like smoke. One cruel act had become entertainment, and the crowd leaned in, hungry for more. "Someone get her a mop," a voice jeered from the sales desk. "She should be grateful we didn't pour it on her chair," another chimed in. Phones were up now, not just one, 3, maybe 4. Screens glowed like spotlights, capturing Amara's soaked blouse, her still posture, the fizzing puddle at her feet. A woman with red nails whispered to her neighbor while filming, "Watch this go viral. She'll cry any second." But Amara didn't cry. She didn't even blink. That stillness made the room restless. They expected outrage, an outburst, something messy enough to justify their cruelty. Instead, she gave them nothing but silence, and silence is a mirror. It forced them to see themselves. Luis, the intern, tightened his grip on his phone. His instinct screamed to speak, to step forward, to say, "This is wrong." But then he caught the glare of his supervisor, a silent warning that said, "Don't you dare." His chest burned with shame, but his feet stayed planted. At the far end, 2 men from accounting chuckled as if it were office gossip. "She won't last a week," one said. The other smirked. "She doesn't belong in this company anyway." That phrase doesn't belong sliced sharper than the Coke dripping from her sleeve. It wasn't about soda. It wasn't about a prank. It was about erasure, about rewriting the rules of who was allowed in this room. The manager, still watching, didn't intervene. His silence wasn't neutral, it was approval. He folded his arms, leaning against the doorway, letting the spectacle play out like a stage show he'd seen before. His smirk told the crowd they were safe to push further. And they did. Better resume was fake. Probably a charity hire. Somebody check if she even has a degree. The comments piled on, each one more venomous, each one designed to chip away at her presence. It wasn't enough to drench her in soda, they wanted to drench her in doubt. Amara didn't move. She let every word land. She let them believe she was small, because in their arrogance, they were writing their own downfall, sentence by sentence. The air in the office wasn't professional anymore. It was charged with something darker, cruelty disguised as camaraderie, power disguised as policy. Luis whispered under his breath, almost inaudible. "This isn't right." "Haven," the woman next to him snapped. "Shut up, don't ruin the fun." Amara finally drew a slow breath, eyes fixed on the manager. He shifted slightly, maybe unsettled, but he didn't speak. Not yet. And that was the problem. Injustice doesn't grow in silence, it feeds on it. What no one in that room understood was that the silence they mistook for weakness was the silence of calculation. 5 minutes more, she thought, just 5, because the door would open. And when it did, laughter would choke in every throat. She could have shouted. She could have cursed every name in that room, slammed her fists against the desk, demanded justice right then and there. That's what they expected. That's what they wanted a storm to film, a meltdown to laugh about later at happy hour. But Amara gave them nothing. Her hand, sticky with soda, brushed once across her cheek. Slow, measured. She set the damp napkin down on her desk, then folded her hands neatly on top of it, as if she were in a meeting instead of soaked in humiliation. That restraint unsettled the room. "Why isn't she saying anything?" someone whispered, nervous now. "She's embarrassed," another replied, but the words didn't sound certain. The fizzing puddle beneath her chair spread wider, crawling toward the carpet. The sound of bubbles bursting was the only noise in the silence she had carved out. Her eyes lifted, scanning the faces around her. Not quick, not darting. Steady. One by one, she let her gaze rest on the woman who threw the can, on the men laughing by the copier, on the manager leaning smugly against the doorway. Each look was calm, almost clinical, as if she were studying exhibits in a museum. And in a way, she was, because cruelty repeats itself like art hung in every generation's gallery. She had seen these faces before, different names, different offices, the same contempt. At 19, in a retail job, when her supervisor accused her of stealing hours because she'd clocked in early. At 27, when a client mistook her for the assistant, even after she introduced herself as the project lead. At 31, when she walked into a gala in a borrowed gown and someone asked if she was part of the staff. Always the same pause, the same judgment, the same smirk that told her she didn't belong. And every time, she had stayed still. Not because she was weak, but because she was already building something larger than their smallness. Now, once again, she sat drenched in their disdain, letting silence become her weapon. The manager cleared his throat, trying to reclaim control of the room. "Well," he said, "maybe she brought this on herself." His voice wasn't confident. It wavered, like a man speaking into a silence heavier than he expected. Luis, the intern, shifted again. His phone was halfway raised before he froze. Amara turned her head slightly, just enough to catch his eyes. She shook her head once. Firm. "Not now. Not like that." Her message was clear. "We don't need lenses. We need witnesses." The woman with the red nails lowered her phone, irritated. "She's not even reacting. What's the point?" That was the point. Amara's stillness was louder than any outburst. It filled the office like pressure before a storm. Everyone felt it, even if they pretended not to. Minutes stretched. The laughter softened. A few people turned back to their screens, typing too hard, pretending to work. But the weight of her silence pressed on them all. They had mistaken her calm for defeat. But calm is not surrender. It is preparation. 5 minutes, she thought again. Just 5. Because when the door opened, silence would belong to someone else. Luis hadn't moved in minutes, but his heart was racing like he'd run a mile. From his corner desk, he could see everything. The puddle beneath Amara's chair, the sticky trail down her blouse, the smirk on the woman who had thrown the Coke. He wasn't supposed to be here, not in this moment, not in this battle. He was an intern, first month on the job, barely trusted to sort files, let alone intervene in office politics. But what he was seeing, it didn't feel like office politics. It felt like something uglier, something historic repeating itself right in front of his eyes. His thumb hovered over the record button on his phone. Just one tap, and the world would see. Just one clip, and the cruelty would be undeniable. But then his supervisor's voice sliced through the air. "Put that down. Nobody needs your little activist stunt today." Luis froze. Around him, a few others snickered. The woman with red nails rolled her eyes. "Yeah, kid, don't bother. Nobody cares." Nobody cares. The words struck him harder than the laughter. Because he did care. And he could see Amara cared too, even if she didn't move. She turned her head, slowly, and her eyes locked on his. There was no anger in them, no pleading, just steadiness, a single shake of her head. Not yet. Luis swallowed hard. His phone lowered to his desk, but something inside him shifted. He wasn't going to forget this. He wasn't going to pretend it didn't happen. Across the room, another witness stirred. A temp worker named Naomi, just 2 weeks into her contract, sat clutching her notebook. She hadn't said a word all morning, but now her lips pressed thin, her eyes darting between Amara and the smirking manager. "This is foul," she whispered, almost too soft to hear. The manager snapped. "What was that?" Naomi straightened her spine, louder this time. "This is foul." A hush fell for a moment. The red-nailed woman scoffed. "Mind your business." But the spell had cracked. The silence was no longer owned by the aggressors. Someone else had named the truth. Luis felt his pulse quicken. He wanted to add his voice, but the weight of fear still pinned him down. Still, hearing Naomi say it out loud, it made the air shift. Amara didn't smile. She didn't move. But she tilted her head ever so slightly, a silent nod in Naomi's direction. A recognition. A thank you. The office wasn't united anymore. It was divided. Half still clung to cruelty, whispering, mocking. The other half, smaller, quieter, had begun to see, to recognize, to doubt, and that was all it would take. Because movements don't begin with crowds. They begin with one witness brave enough to speak, and then another. Luis stared at his phone, at the red button waiting to be pressed. He didn't tap it, not yet. But for the first time, he whispered to himself, "They're wrong. She doesn't deserve this." Amara heard him. She didn't turn, didn't react. But she heard. And sometimes, that's enough to keep standing still. 5 minutes, she thought again. Just 5. Because when the door opened, it wouldn't just be her voice that mattered. It would be every witness who saw and refused to forget. The manager finally pushed himself off the doorframe. His polished shoes clicked against the tile as he stepped into the center of the office, hands clasped behind his back like a judge walking into court. His gaze swept the room once before landing on Amara. Coke still dripped from her sleeve, pooling on the floor beneath her chair. She hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. And that infuriated him more than if she had screamed. "Well," he said, his voice thick with disdain, "looks like you've created quite the disruption." Disruption, that's what he called it. Not harassment, not humiliation, disruption. A few employees chuckled, emboldened by his tone. The woman with the empty can leaned against her desk, smirking, as if she had just been absolved. Amara didn't respond. Her silence pressed against him like a wall. He cleared his throat and tried again, sharper this time. "You should be grateful this is all that happened. People like you bring trouble into places that used to run just fine." That phrase, "people like you," stung the air like a slap. Naomi, the temp worker who had spoken earlier, shifted in her seat, her lips parted, but fear sealed them again. Luis clenched his fists beneath his desk. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. The manager stepped closer. "This company is built on professionalism, on image, and right now, you're embarrassing yourself and everyone around you." Still, Amara said nothing. Her eyes, steady and unblinking, stayed fixed on him. That calmness was unsettling, and he felt it. His jaw tightened. He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to make the insult intimate. "You don't belong here, and maybe it's time we made that official." Gasps rippled across the room. Even some of the employees who had laughed earlier looked uneasy. It was one thing to watch a cruel prank. It was another to hear the manager himself spit the words aloud. Naomi stood suddenly, her voice trembling but clear. "She's not the one embarrassing this company. You are." The office froze. All eyes turned. Naomi's hands shook, but she didn't sit back down. The manager's eyes narrowed. "Careful," he warned. "You're new here. Contracts end as quickly as they begin." Naomi's chin lifted, defiant. "Then let it end. At least I'll know I said something." Luis felt the courage crawl up his throat, but he still couldn't push the words out. Not yet. His silence gnawed at him, but so did the weight of the manager's authority. The woman with the red nails muttered, "Idiot. She just ruined her job." But something had shifted. The cruelty wasn't unanimous anymore. The cracks were showing. The manager straightened, pulling himself taller, trying to reclaim control. "Enough," he barked. "This spectacle ends now. Security will escort you out." He pointed at Amara like she was a trespasser, not an employee. Amara didn't flinch. She folded her damp napkin again, slow and deliberate, and set it neatly on the desk. Her silence stretched so long that even the hum of the fluorescent lights felt loud. The manager mistook it for weakness. He didn't know it was the calm before his reckoning. 5 minutes, she thought again. Just 5, because when the door opened, it wouldn't be security who walked through. The manager's words cracked through the office like a gavel. "Security will escort you out." But it wasn't security who moved first. It was the woman who had thrown the coat. Still grinning, still hungry for humiliation, she stepped forward and yanked Amara's lanyard from around her neck. The plastic ID badge snapped free, dangling like stolen proof of existence. "There," she sneered, holding it up for everyone to see. "She's not one of us anymore." Gasps scattered across the cubicles. Some clapped nervously, others looked away. Luis felt his stomach drop, nausea twisting inside him. Naomi muttered, "That's theft," but her voice was drowned by laughter. Amara didn't reach for the badge. She didn't grab it back. She sat motionless, the faint fizz of soda on the carpet, the only sound filling the gap. The manager took the badge from the woman and slipped it into his pocket like evidence. His tone hardened. "This is official now. You're done here." Luis whispered under his breath. "She didn't even do anything." His voice cracked, but no one heard. Another man from the sales team leaned over a cubicle wall. "Call security already. Drag her out. We've got work to do." Someone else added, "Yeah, the janitor can clean up her mess on the way out." The cruelty was no longer casual. It was sharpened, deliberate. They weren't just mocking her, they were erasing her. Naomi stood again, voice louder this time. "You can't just strip her badge. That's illegal. The manager shot her a glare. "Sit down. This doesn't concern you." But it did. It concerned everyone in that room, whether they admitted it or not. Amara finally moved. Not with fury, not with panic. She reached for her phone with steady hands and set it on the desk, screen down. Her voice was low but clear. "Call him." The room stilled. "Who?" The coke thrower scoffed. "Your lawyer?" Laughter rippled again, but softer this time. Uneasy. Amara didn't answer. She didn't need to. Luis felt something shift, though he couldn't explain it. The calm in her tone, the precision of her silence, it carried weight heavier than any outburst could. The manager waved his hand dismissively. "Call whoever you like. It won't change the fact that you're finished." But Amara's eyes said otherwise. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was a countdown. Naomi clenched her fists, trembling but resolute. "You're making the biggest mistake of your careers," she said, her voice cutting through the nervous laughter. The coke thrower scoffed again. "Oh, please. She doesn't even belong here. Never did." She tossed the badge onto the manager's desk like trash. That was the breaking point. Because stripping someone's identity isn't just procedure. It's violence. And everyone in that room felt it, even if only for a flicker. Luis swallowed hard, heart pounding. He wanted to scream. He wanted to record. But all he could do was whisper to himself, 5 minutes. Just 5. Amara folded her hands again, steady, her gaze fixed on the door. Because she knew. When it opened, the badge wouldn't matter. The titles wouldn't matter. Everything would flip. The badge lay abandoned on the manager's desk, coke still dripping from Amara's sleeve. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then, with the calm of someone who had already decided the outcome, Amara picked up her phone. She didn't dial frantically. She didn't fumble. She tapped once, then lifted it to her ear. Her voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder in the silence. "It's time." The words landed heavy. No names, no explanations, just 2 syllables that sounded less like a plea and more like an order. A few employees chuckled nervously. "Who's she calling? Her pastor? Maybe the police," another mocked. The coke thrower smirked. "Oh, honey, 911 won't save you here." But Amara didn't answer. She didn't need to. On the other end of the line, a voice replied, calm and professional. "Understood. Executing now." Luis's head snapped up. He wasn't sure what he had just overheard, but the hairs on his arms stood on end. Naomi caught it too, her eyes widening. The manager scoffed. "Cute performance, but whoever you just called has no power in this building." Amara set the phone down on her desk, screen glowing faintly. She folded her hands again, posture steady. It looked like patience, but it was something else entirely precision. The coke thrower leaned over, sneering. "So what now? Your husband gonna swoop in and save you?" She laughed, loud and shrill, but her voice cracked halfway through. No one joined her. Because the atmosphere had shifted, subtly, but undeniably. The silence wasn't just Amara's anymore. It pressed into the corners of the office, into the chests of every witness. Luis whispered to himself, "She knows something we don't." The manager tried to reclaim the room. "All right," he barked. "Enough games. Security is on their way. By the time they arrive, you'll be off this floor." He turned to the coke thrower. "Escort her to the lobby. Now." She smirked, stepping forward like she was about to shove Amara out of her chair. But Amara raised a hand slow, deliberate. Not to strike, to stop. The gesture was simple, but the effect was electric. For the first time, hesitation rippled through her tormentors. Her voice cut through the tension, even and sharp. "Touch me, and you'll answer to someone you don't want to meet." The coke thrower froze. The manager scoffed, but his smirk faltered. "Big words," he muttered. Naomi stepped closer, emboldened. "She's not bluffing. You can feel it." Luis gripped the edge of his desk, his pulse quickening. He didn't know who Amara had called. He didn't know what was coming, but he believed her. The office was no longer laughing. Phones lowered, whispers hushed. The weight of something unseen filled the air. Amara's eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. 5 minutes had nearly passed. She leaned back slightly, her voice soft but certain. "He's almost here." The glass doors at the far end of the office swung open. Not with a crash, not with drama, just a clean, deliberate push. And suddenly silence. Every head turned as a tall man in a tailored navy suit stepped inside. His stride was unhurried, but there was no mistaking the authority in it. He didn't glance at the rows of employees, or the manager, or the Coke dripping onto the carpet. His eyes went straight to Amara. Her stillness broke for the first time, not into fear, into recognition. "Amara," he said, his voice low, steady. "What happened?" The room froze. Nobody knew his name yet, but they felt it in the hush that swept the office, in the way their own manager straightened instinctively, as if confronted by someone who signed checks, not requests. The Coke thrower tried to laugh. "Who are you supposed to be? Her lawyer? Her—" The man cut her off without looking at her. "Explain this," he ordered, his gaze pinned on the manager. The manager stammered. This is a misunderstanding, sir. Just a disruption with one of our junior staff." He gestured vaguely at Amara, as if she were the problem. That was his mistake. Because the man in the Navy suit was Elias Johnson, billionaire, founder of one of the largest investment groups in the state, and, most importantly, Amara's husband. A ripple of realization moved through the room. Luis nearly dropped his phone. Naomi gasped. The Coke thrower's smirk collapsed into a mask of panic. Elias stepped closer, his shoes sharp against the tile. He took the ID badge from the manager's desk, turned it over once in his hand, then set it back down like it was evidence in a trial. "This woman you just humiliated," he said evenly, "isn't just your colleague." His eyes shifted to Amara, then back to the crowd. "She is my wife." The words detonated in the silence. Gasps, whispers, the shuffle of feet. A dozen phones rose again, but this time not to mock, to capture history. The manager's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Elias's gaze swept the room. "I don't care about your excuses. I want to know who threw that can." No one moved. The Coke thrower's hand twitched, betraying her. Elias saw it. His eyes locked on her, cold and merciless. "You," he said, "step forward." She froze. "It was just a joke," she stammered. Elias's jaw tightened. "You think humiliation is a joke? You think tearing down a black woman in her own workplace is entertainment?" His voice didn't rise, but the weight of it crushed every laugh left in the room. Amara sat quietly, letting his presence fill the space she had held with silence. Luis whispered, "She wasn't bluffing." Naomi nodded, eyes wide. For the first time all morning, Amara allowed herself a small breath of release. The countdown was over. The door had opened. And the reckoning had begun. The office that had been so loud just minutes before was now suffocatingly quiet. The laughter was gone, replaced by dread. The Coke thrower's smirk had shattered. She stumbled back a step, hands shaking. It wasn't me," she lied, voice cracking. "I was just passing the can." Luis muttered under his breath, "That's not what happened." But his phone was already rolling. Naomi crossed her arms. "Everyone saw it. Don't you dare pretend." The manager's forehead gleamed with sweat. His earlier confidence had evaporated. He forced a laugh, desperate, brittle. "Mr. Johnson, I assure you, this was a misunderstanding. We would never—" "Never?" Elias's voice cut sharp. "Then explain why my wife is drenched in soda while her ID badge sits in your pocket." The manager froze. His hand twitched toward his suit, then stopped. The truth was out in the open, undeniable. Around the room, employees who had cheered moments ago now tried to disappear. Screens lit up as people clicked frantically, pretending to work. Some slipped their phones into drawers, as if burying evidence could erase their complicity. But it was too late. Naomi's voice rose, steady now. "They humiliated her. We all saw it, and you let it happen." Luis nodded, courage breaking through his fear. "It's all on video." The Coke thrower's face drained of color. The manager's jaw worked, but no words came. And the rest of the office, the bystanders, the silent enablers sat frozen, realizing they were no longer spectators. They were defendants. Elias didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence alone had turned the tide. And in that tide, every guilty face was drowning. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. When he spoke, every ear bent toward him. Every screen dimmed in fear of being caught ignoring him. "HR," he said into his phone, his tone calm as stone. "Log this incident. Effective immediately terminate the employment of everyone involved, manager included." Gasps rippled across the office. The Coke thrower's knees buckled. "Wait, please, I didn't mean—" Elias's gaze cut through her. "You meant every drop. You meant every laugh. You meant every word that told my wife she didn't belong. Actions have consequences. The manager stammered, Mr. Johnson, surely we can review this more. Review? Elias stepped closer, the weight of his presence suffocating. You stripped a woman of her dignity and her badge in front of witnesses. You think you're owed a review? You're owed an exit. Luis's phone trembled in his hand as he recorded. For once, he wasn't afraid. He was documenting justice in real time. Naomi stood taller beside him, her chin high, her eyes bright. The coke thrower dropped into her chair, pale as paper. The red-nailed woman tried to slide her phone into her purse, as if deleting her videos could save her job. The rest of the office stayed frozen, no longer sure if silence could protect them. Elias's phone buzzed. He listened for a beat, then nodded. Confirmed. Their access is revoked. Security is en route to escort them out. The manager's jaw dropped. You can't just... But Elias cut him off, voice flat and final. I own 40% of this company. I don't need permission. I am the permission. The room reeled. For months they had mocked Amara for being quiet, for staying in the background. Now, the truth crashed over them like a wave. She had been their equal and more all along, and the man they thought was a stranger had just ended their careers with a single phone call. Naomi whispered, almost to herself, This is what power looks like. Luis nodded, breathless. And this is what justice feels like. Elias turned to his wife. His tone softened, but his words still carried to every corner. They thought they could erase you. Now they're the ones erased. Amara met his eyes, calm as ever. For the first time all morning, she allowed herself a small nod. The verdict was sealed. Security arrived in silence. 2 officers in Navy uniforms stepped into the office, scanning the scene. Elias didn't need to gesture. HR had already relayed his orders. Badges were deactivated, logins revoked, careers ended before the hum of fluorescent lights could blink. The coke thrower tried to argue, her voice high, desperate. I was just joking. The officer held out a hand. Ma'am, you'll need to come with us. Her protests dissolved into the air, unanswered. The manager opened his mouth, but Elias spoke before he could form a sentence. Save your breath. Every excuse you make is another insult. The man closed his mouth, eyes darting around the room for support that wasn't there. His staff stared at their screens, pretending to type, pretending not to drown in the weight of consequence. Amara finally rose from her chair. The soda had dried sticky on her blouse, a visible scar of what they had tried to do. She didn't rush to clean it. She didn't hide it. She wore it like proof. Her voice was low, but every word carried. You thought I didn't belong, but this is my place. My dignity isn't yours to decide. The room shuddered in silence. Elias stepped beside her. He didn't raise his hand, didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the faces in front of him, faces that just minutes ago had laughed, clapped, cheered cruelty. She's not just my wife, he said evenly. She is the measure of this company's character, and today, you showed yours. Naomi closed her notebook, her eyes bright with a mix of anger and awe. Luis hit stop on his recording, knowing the footage would outlive the shame in this room. The officers escorted the guilty toward the door. The coke thrower wept. The manager's shoulders slumped. For the first time, their powerlessness showed. Amara turned once more, scanning the office. Some met her gaze. Most couldn't. You mistook silence for surrender, she said, her voice steady as steel. That was your last mistake. Elias placed a hand lightly at her back, guiding her toward the exit, but his words lingered behind them like a gavel's echo. From this day forward, let it be clear dignity isn't optional. It's the foundation. Lose that, and you lose everything. The door closed behind them. The office remained, smaller now, emptied of its false laughter. The fizz of spilled coke had gone flat. History had been made in silence, broken only by truth.